Welcome to another episode of Let's Start Justice. My name is Michael Jackson, Executive Director of JFJ.
My name is Jade Williams, Policy and Advocacy Specialist at JFJ.
So I think today is the last, Tuesday?
The
of
last
January?
Tuesday of January,
Yes. The longest month of the year, according to some people who spend the money a little bit too early in December.
Well, I guess I'm one of the some people.
But we are certainly happy that our listeners continue to join us. Today we are discussing ending corporal punishment and looking at how that will respect the rights of our children and perhaps a step in the right direction as we try to address violence in the country. Right?
Absolutely.
Now, as is customary, we're going to be looking at some matters that arose last week. One of them we're going to be focusing on towards the last 15 minutes of our program, which is the matter surrounding the Joyland Silvera case, where the media and the public were barred from hearing the matter, from sitting in court and getting a sense of what is happening. But as I said, we will focus on that towards the end. But just very quickly, I'm just coming from a launch that was initiated by the National Integrity Action, founded by Professor Trevor Monroe, Principal Director Daniel Archer, who is an attorney at law. And they launched the Corruption Prevention Index, which is something that is shared each year by Transparency International. And I think what is glaring is that Jamaica has remained with a ranking of 44 out of 100. To put in context for our listeners, if you rank, or if you get a score rather of 0, it means that you're very, very, very corrupt,
Yes.
right? Your institutions are not working. It means that you're highly involved in bribery and all of these corrupt actions that we know of, nepotism and so on. And if you get a score, a pass mark of 50, it means that you have some work to do,
Yes.
but it's not too bad. But obviously when it perhaps get to 70 and to the 100, it means that, you know, your country is doing very well. Jamaica is at 44, and we have been at a score of 44 for somewhat 3 years.
Yes. We have.
And, you know, I see some government officials saying that this is very good. This is the best we've gotten for some time. But Miss Archer, the principal director of NIA at the launch, said that she used the word stagnant.
Mhm.
That's the word that she used to describe the current score that Jamaica has received. And just to indicate, though we have shifted a little bit between perhaps ranking at, I think, 70 at one point with the same score of 44, and then we moved to about 69 at one point. It just simply means that somebody was a little bit more corrupt than Jamaica.
Yes.
But our score itself remained. And I don't think 44 is anything to celebrate, because what it suggests is that though we have the institutions that are meant to address corruption in the country, when you look at what happened last year, where you had public officials going in Parliament and making some disturbing comments and attack against the anti-corruption agency that is Integrity Commission, then it is something to be alarmed about. So you have the institutions, but how are you ensuring that those institutions get the work done as they are mandated to do?
And you know, it is very in line with some of the advocacy points that would have raised
Yes.
last year. But just to say that the score being below 50, Transparency International themselves have some indicators as to
Yes.
what that means. And it does include your anti-corruption institutions being unable to give account to the extent that is expected. And it also includes an overwhelming dominance of the executive over the legislature.
Yes.
Another thing that we've been seeing a lot more of.
And it's and just to indicate to our listeners, as Jade pointedly mentioned, when you talk about executive dominance, it's recognizing again that you have your three branches of government, your executive and your legislature. They're fused, wherein those who sit in the lower house and the upper house also sit in the cabinet over by the executive branch. But the reality is that the Prime Minister has extraordinary powers in a parliamentary system. It means that when you go to Parliament, which is your legislative branch, when decisions are being taken and laws are being reviewed, you find that the legislator is not there to be the check and balance as it is intended to do. You find that the backbenchers simply knock the benches and support their political party that sits in the executive. And it's a word that I've often used, is that the executive branch of government is so powerful that it has rendered your legislator impotent. And that is what Transparency International has indicated. But just lastly on this particular topic, NIA also launched a survey that was undertaken by Market Services Research. That is done, Anderson. If I got the name incorrect, please forgive me. But it went into the communities and it interviewed some 750 residents to get a sense of their perception of corruption because of the shortcomings, if you will, of how the corruption perception index is done, where it doesn't really get the pulse of the people. So that's a gap that NIA tried to plug. And I don't have all the findings here recorded, but a couple of things jumped out at me. Some 92% of the persons interviewed believe that our parliamentarians were corrupt, 92% thereabout. Another 90% believe that the police were also corrupt. And then when you look, I think over 70-something percentage of those who were interviewed believe that corruption is a normal way of life in this country. So NIA will be releasing its findings, but those issues jumped out at me, yes, which means that we have much work to do.
Indeed, yeah? Absolutely.
And just one more second, Jay. I'm not sure if you saw this article. Security guard beating a 14-year-old.
Yes, I did see it.
Yeah, but I guess we will talk more when we get into corporal punishment.
Certainly. So thanks to Mikel for our recap for the week, and we will go straight now into our Did You Know? This week it comes from the Child Care and Protection Act, and it's section 62, and it speaks to the rights of children in state care. Just to plug, these are not all the rights that are listed in that section, but you can look at it for yourselves on your own time. But we wanted to mention a few. Now, where there is a child in a place of safety, a children's home, or in the fit care of a person, which is usually to indicate state care, that statement, then the child is to be fed, clothed, and nurtured according to the standards, to be given the same quality of other children, that the child should be consulted and dealt with according to their abilities, be allowed to express their views and make significant and be a part of any significant decisions that affect them, to be free from corporal punishment, and to have reasonable privacy and possession of their personal belongings. And we'll ask our trivia question for today, which, as you can see, we just went to the Child Care and Protection Act that has a prohibition on corporal punishment in that section. Which other act also already prohibits corporal punishment in Jamaica? So you can respond to that by commenting on our Instagram, or you can send us a WhatsApp at 2397583.
All right, so the topic for today, we're focusing on ending corporal punishment. And I think when you look at the issue of violence in the country, it has been alarmingly high. So the Maureen Vaughn led National Violence Prevention Commission that was commissioned by the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, our Prime Minister, made a recommendation that to really deal with the issue of violence, perhaps one of the first steps is to do a total ban on corporal punishment in the country. Now, on January 12, 2024, the Prime Minister, while he was speaking to some students at Manchester High School, indicating that his government will be moving to actually actualize this total ban. I hasten to point out that the Prime Minister has made such similar commitments on at least 2 occasions in the past, so I personally look forward to this actually being done.
Now, corporal or physical punishment is defined by the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, which oversees the Convention of the Rights of the Child, as any punishment in which physical force is used and intended to cause some degree of pain or discomfort, however light. Now, other child justice advocates and JFJ would have supported this ban for quite some time now, and have been vocal supporters of, as Mikel would have mentioned, previous announcements by the Prime Minister, for example, in 2017, for amendments to allow for a ban on corporal punishment. So in 2017, there was an announcement that the Education Act would have been amended to actualize that ban in schools, but it has yet to be so.
Now, JFJ, we do welcome this recommendation coming from Maureen Vaughn, the commission that she heads, and we have seen such similar welcoming from the children's advocate and attorney at law, Mrs. Diane Gordon Harrison, who looks at corporal punishment and call it an abuse and that it is violence. So she has been asking for children to, or parents rather, to focus on better ways of disciplining their children, and that there are other measures that are workable and meaningful alternatives to corporal punishment. Now we're joined by human rights and child rights advocate, Mr. Alexis Goff, and we're also joined by Ms. Jana Harris, child protection consultant with UNICEF Jamaica. Let me start with you, Alexis. Good afternoon and welcome again.
Good afternoon.
Just to get your initial reaction to the recommendation coming from the Commission, as well as the announcement by the Prime Minister that the government will be moving to actualize this total ban.
Well, I welcome the announcement. As you rightly said, we have had this announcement repeated over the years. And it has been a point of debate in Parliament at various joint select committees over a couple of decades, as far as we can, check the records. But it is definitely welcomed, and it needs to be implemented. We can discuss a bit later because there are concerns about its implementation. But if we are serious about addressing violence in Jamaica and the unusually high levels of violence that we historically have separated it from how children have been exposed to violence through one of the ways being corporal punishment, and it's high time that we understand the connection and support families and parents in ending it.
All right, thank you so much. We're going to take the break, and upon our return, we take Ms. Harris's perspective from UNICEF and get a sense of how UNICEF perhaps plan on assisting us in Jamaica here to deal with this long-standing issue. We take the break.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. Today we are discussing ending corporal punishment, and we are joined by Mr. Alexis Goff and Ms. Jana Harris from UNICEF. Ms. Harris, before the break, we just wanted you to shed some light on UNICEF's perspective on this recommendation coming from the National Violence Commission, and what role could UNICEF maybe play in assisting us to reach this goal of banning corporal punishment completely?
Okay, so good afternoon, Mikel and Jade and Mr. Goff. Thank you so much for welcoming UNICEF to this dialogue. It's a dialogue that we have been having for quite a while. We also are aware of the commitment made by the Prime Minister some years ago, because that was what led us to be a part of the getting involved in dealing with the National Plan of Action for an Integrated Response to Children and Violence. UNICEF played a very huge role. Yes. And we are saying that we want that plan of action to be reviewed and to be revamped and revitalized and actually implemented, fully implemented, because there are some very important points in there that we would really like to see come to fruition. One such is the strengthening of the legal and regulatory framework, because in ending corporal punishment, what one needs to understand that prohibition by law sends a very clear message that hurting children or hitting children is just as wrong as hitting and hurting an adult. So when it comes to respecting the rights of children, one person to understand that children have their own personhood. They're their own person. They're human beings just like us. And the same way in which we wouldn't want someone to slap us because we made a mistake, slap us because we said something wrong or there was a misunderstanding, children also feel the same way because they're human beings. They can be corrected, and with rules of discipline, children will understand where they're going wrong and so forth. So we think that strengthening the legal and regulatory framework will demonstrate that we recognize children as human beings. We recognize them as persons. We're also looking to help the government in improving the quality of access to services for children affected by physical discipline, physical violence. And not only the children, but also the parents, because some years ago, UNICEF launched Parent Text. That is a messaging platform that parents could, send the word parent to the number. Let me tell you the number: 1-876-838-4897, and they would get tips. So it's not instructions on how to raise your children, because we're not giving people instruction on how to raise your children. We're giving them self-care tips. How can you take care of yourself as a parent so that that stress and that frustration and overwhelming feeling that you have with all of the things in life, your bills, everything, that you do not turn around and take it out on the child. So when we're talking about ending corporal punishment, we're not only looking at the child. Yes, it is a child-centered approach, because we're looking at the child as being the main person involved and the main person who needs the attention and protection and care. But parents also need that, and we at UNICEF believe that parents should always be included in these conversations. We don't want to make it seem as if we're condemning parents for what is taking place, but we are inviting them to be a part of a new path, and a more positive path, a gentler path when it comes to disciplining our children. And so we are also looking towards the NPA's CV, which is the National Plan of Action, to strengthen family and community capacities to address issues. So, parenting seminars, town halls, advocacy campaigns, sensitizing the children and the country on the new positive way we would like to take when it comes to alternative ways of disciplining our children and avoiding violent means. And with prohibition, Mikel and Jade and Mr. Goff, we would see that although prohibition by law is very good, it's a very good step, legal reform alone will not do it. So we need to move away from that gradually to go to total elimination of corporal punishment. So, for example, Jade had raised it earlier in the Did You Know segment, rather, about places of safety having that law that says, should be free of corporal punishment.
Yes.
The early childhood institutions as well have it.
Yes.
For some, in 2007, when I was a teacher, there was a directive from the Ministry of Education that teachers should not slap children. Teachers should not exercise corporal punishment in the school. That was a prohibition by directive. We can now move to one where it's totally eliminated from the school, the primary level and the secondary level. And so UNICEF is looking to help in that regard with advocacy campaigns, with whatever programs the Prime Minister and government and any other entity has that is showing some commitment to legally banning corporal punishment. UNICEF is ready and on board to help in that regard.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jana. And we really appreciate it, because there's several things we want to pick up in terms of that gradual approach once the legislative reform actually happens, because we know about the policy directive coming from the Ministry of Education. JFJ, in the past, we have called for there to actually be the change in the law. But this total ban is now suggesting that it will happen also within the homes.
Yes.
So moving from the institutional setting, as we now understand it, to now it being in the homes. If I could segue back to you, Alexis, in terms of what is your perspective about how that approach could take? Because, before you answer, I think we can all remember perhaps how we were disciplined, and I use the word disciplined here loosely.
Yes.
Because we remember getting beaten with the sticks, the broomstick, some, children, I remember being thrown pots and pans and so on at them. And even some of us as adults, and even some children now normalize that.
Yeah.
So how do we get to that stage of total ban from your perspective, Alexis, working with children and their families?
Well, so one of the things I want to start off with by saying is that a lot of these discussions tend to focus on the individuals and the parents. And a matter of fact, politicians, police, they tend to use this as a way to kind of target and attack, and sometimes even go as far as dehumanizing parents. And when I say parents here and families, I'm talking about specifically poor and working class parents, which we know it does not. This is not the only group of people that have corporal punishment in their homes. And the irony of it is, if you have the government talking about a total ban of corporal punishment, as has been stated before, we already have statutes or laws and policies about government institutions that are supposed to stop, but we know, and it is well documented, that one of the most serious, consistent, perpetual abusers of children and people that carry out the most consistent corporal punishment of children are state institutions. So we have to look at how this will be implemented, because we also know that the current modus operandi of the administration has been to be harsher, as we see in legislation, harsher on and the furtherance of criminalization of poor and working class people in their laws and in their penalties. And so in order to address and to support the end of corporal punishment to children, there has to be the first has to be looking at state institutions, because as I said, there are documented cases, hundreds of documented cases of state-sanctioned corporal punishment to children. And this is not just in the decades ago, this is right up until now, current day, present day. But also not just looking at the criminalization of individuals, the criminalization of parents and of families, because this is a structural thing. And so, as Jana had talked about before, this goes beyond the individual. We have to look at the factors that increase the likelihood of families and children living in and operating in a high-stress, toxic environment. We have to look at the factors in a classroom that increase the likelihood of children and staff operating in a high-stress, toxic, abusive environment. And some of those factors are things such as adequate housing. There are things such as universal child care. In other words, having people help families with childcare, on a daily, on a weekly basis, and having that be something that doesn't come at a sacrifice of a financial compensation or of a job, as frequently happens. Many parents stop working because they now are having to parent their child, which of course brings a lot of stress and strain, financial and emotional, on a family, which increases likelihood of stress and toxic environments. We're also talking about access to things such as water. I mean, we're talking about basic needs, which we know currently in Jamaica, we cannot claim that every family, all communities have. And so we have to look at the systemic and the structural, in addition to the support. So when a parent does call, or a family member does call and say, yo, this happened to me, right? My parents beat me, they assaulted me, and I have been dying for the opportunity to stop that pattern, but I now have a child and it is incredibly hard to do so. What help can I get? That it is a plethora, multiple avenues of support that our parents and families can be offered, that children can gain access to, in order to, be supported and to break that pattern. So it goes from the systemic things, the factors that, as I said, can increase the likelihood of violence and stress in a household and in a classroom, and it goes to the individual. And the last thing I say now is that as a psychologist, I have been currently dealing with children who have been referred to getting some sort of assessment, right? We tend to pathologize children also when they are just doing what is normal and childhood appropriate for their childhood development. But they're sent to be assessed. And actually, when they get this assessment, there are recommendations in some cases for what support the child and the family needs. And when you ask the professional, where can we go to get this support? Many times
they don't have a response. And even if they have a response, when you call that place an institution, the wait list can be months. So we need to not have parents and families be the scapegoats in this. We need to acknowledge that this happens at a state level with children in state care too on a consistent basis, and that it also requires systemic and structural support for families and for children.
Thank you so much, Mr. Goff. So we are on a break, right? We're about coming up onto a break now. But when we return, I would like both you and Ms. Harris to share with us any available support that is there, because I hear you talking about the support that is needed and the gaps in that structure. So what exists now, and what can parents access, and how can they access that? So I'll ask you both to return with that when we come from the break. Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We've been discussing ending corporal punishment with human rights advocate Alexis Goff and UNICEF consultant Ms. Jana Harris. Ms. Harris, we'll start back with you. What support is already available to parents who might want to be exploring alternative, non-violent disciplinary methods with their children?
Okay, thank you for that. So I briefly mentioned it prior. We have something called parent text. I see I have my picture up. WhatsApp the word parent 876-838-4897. Jamaica is the first in the Caribbean to launch this messaging platform. When you do send a message to that number, each day you can tell it when you would want the messages, like if you want it in the morning, in the afternoon, in the night. And it gives parents tips, self-care tips on how to take care of themselves first, and so that they can know how best to relate to their children. It also helps with the way our parents, mother, father, relate to each other, because you know that family violence is a very, very common thing.
Yes.
And we have domestic violence taking place in the home, spouses having arguments, children are witnessing these things. And so parent text helps in that regard. And also what we have is other programs under the Spotlight Initiative that ended, but these programs are still going on, that spoke or dealt with parents in the communities, trained some of them, trained community leaders, and have them there as support in those specific communities that they were trained in. So we have that going on, or UNICEF has that going on. So those specific communities are benefiting from that support. We also have the National Parenting Support Committee that we work very closely with, and this year we're going to do even bigger things with them, because things got derailed a bit last year, but we're coming on board this year to help with the NPSC helpline, where parents can call the helpline and get assistance, tips, information on where they can carry their children, referrals and stuff like that. So those things are currently available. They will be revamped and improved, because last year with parent text, we traveled the length and breadth of the country, going to different schools, different communities, speaking with parents who were enrolled on the parent text platform to get feedback from them as to what they were thinking about this particular platform. And they would tell us what they think was a strength, what they think was a weakness. And so it's for us now at UNICEF to really come now and improve it and do a relaunch of that program, because from what we've seen, it has been successful. Parents are very happy with it. One parent told us that when she used to shout at the child and yell at the child, and then it escalates and she might slap the child and so forth. She now knows that she needs to walk away, maybe count to 10 and do other little exercises, breathing exercises, maybe talk to someone else. A thing that we have been removed from in this country is, raising the child, with a village. Sometimes you, the parents, you're not in the place to speak to the child at that very moment, but you may have other relatives, you may have a neighbor, you may have a friend who can speak with the child and talk with the child and get involved in helping the child, because when children witness these things, there's this very popular saying that children live what they learn, and so we want to dismantle that practice where children are living and learning these bad behaviors, bad ways of dealing with conflict, with misunderstanding, with wrongdoing. Because one study shows that when children witness these things, they perpetuate them in adulthood. So the violent behavior, they don't know how to deal with conflict. They don't know how to deal with when somebody has wronged them. So they do what they learned. A survey that we did with the same parents even showed this, that where over 50% of the parents surveyed said that they use the physical discipline because that is what them know. Them they grow up on, them parents did use, and they don't know any other way to deal with it. And so if we are going to re-socialize the society, we have to start by giving them the tips on how to do the gentler parenting, the positive parenting. And so these helplines that I've shared with you are already on board with us at UNICEF and will help in any regard. Yes.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jana. I really appreciate it. I just had a question though, and I love the parenting tips. But when you use the buzzword re-socialization, that's one. And Alexis spoke about the systemic issues. I'm just curious as to maybe the duration of some of these trainings and where they're done, whether they're within the communities and so on, outside of the tip line, because you can imagine that for some parents where this is what they know culturally, as well as they may have financial situations. Some of them are victims themselves within the context of domestic abuse.
Right.
So what type of in-depth training and support is being done outside of the tip line that you mentioned? And after your answer, I would love if Alexis could jump in to give his view on this, because socialization or re-socialization, I think, needs that hands-on approach. But how do you get to people to get it done? So we'll start with you first, Jana, if you may.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So we have implementers. So we have agencies like the Children First Agency. They did spectacular work. They went into 6 parishes to different communities, and they worked with the parents and the community leaders. They had their workshops, they had the seminars, they had their different walkthrough in the communities and so forth. We also had one where it was with teachers through Rise Life Management. They went into the schools and they talked to the teachers on family violence and gender-based violence, along with the students, of course. And they taught them the different things, pulled from them what they understood, pulled from them what they knew, and then they tried to let them know that this is the way, this is what it's causing, this is how it causes a cycle of the violence. So violence begets violence. So if it will continue, it doesn't stop somewhere. And so they teach them these things. And so it will go deep into the community, in the schools, and we are planning on doing more of that this year on a bigger scale. And so UNICEF is always going to try to work with implementing partners.
Yes.
UNICEF, we mainly stay in the office.
Yes,
but we
yes.
have implementing partners that really, work in the community, the community-based organizations. Last year, we got on board some faith-based organizations. So we're now targeting the churches to assist us. One, the UT, oh my God, the University Theological College of the West Indies. I'm trying to remember.
Yes. I can't remember the name, but yes.
Yeah, they now have a course that UNICEF has sponsored that they're now teaching at their college. So we're trying to get into not only the communities and so, but also in curriculum. So we are now at that university where they're teaching their soon-to-be pastors, soon-to-be lay pastors, who will be talking to congregations upon congregations, who will be talking to persons in communities. So it's a training the trainer kind of model that we're using to get persons to learn the method of how we would like to get to the positive parenting, the gentler parenting, and then having them pass that on and, reciprocate that, get it over and over and over and over and over to different people. So that's what we're working on now.
Thank you so much.
Sorry.
Let me segue to Alexis. Thanks, Jana, in the interest of time. Alexis, from your perspective, what are some of those re-socialization mechanism and techniques that perhaps need to be done? And in doing that, how do we address some of the systemic issues that, you know, and you said it earlier, and I want to reiterate our support that what you don't want perhaps is criminalization of parents, where you may find that it's parents within the lower socioeconomic background that, you know, will be at risk of being imprisoned and so on. So, you know, what are your thoughts on this particular issue?
Yeah, Michael, I think that's a really good point. So I think that resocialization, all of that is very hard, or seeking to build a new culture or a different culture is very hard. Actually, can I just stick up in? It's not new. It's a very important point that I normally say to families. This is not new culture for us as African Jamaicans, pre-colonialization. All the records and whatever documentation that has shown that West African families and cultures prior to colonialization and slavery, there was no documented ritualistic abuse of children in the name of disciplining, right? That this was introduced. It's not a Black thing. This is not an African thing, that this was introduced to us by Europeans, right? And when you look at what has been documented about how Europeans were disciplining their children, that is where a lot of this violence has come from. That was then thrust upon us. And so one of the things that is needed in this cultural shift is for communities and people to seek out those that are on a similar page. As you wanting to, seek better, ways of supporting your child, disciplining your child, and guiding your child through, the challenging times and difficulties, and not limiting it to an individual, not limiting it to that the child is the only one that needs support, but also understanding that the family needs support too. And so what I've seen in various communities in Jamaica, and some of these are intergenerational attempts, is that there are groups that have been created, child care co-ops, if you will, of people that have agreed, that they will take a set of children, after school, every single day afterwards, from the hours of 2 o'clock to 5 or 2 to 6 or whatever, help with homework and with any classes or activities or that kind of stuff, in order for, by the time the family comes back home, that there lessens the likelihood of a high tense situation, because lots of times the family come back from whatever was going on at work or on the road during the day, and they're tired and drained. Child, is being a child, that's a high tense situation. So I recognize the fact that there are state offerings, I suppose, or state services, limited as they may be, but there are people who have said, we can't wait to access those services or wait until those services become accessible. Let's try and create this on our own level, on a community level. And so I do think that starting there, seeking in the various spaces that people are in, whether it be work, whether it be a neighbor, community, church, other people who are like, we want to break this, right? We do not want this to continue. And what do we need in order for us to be gentler with our children? What do we need in order for us to have a more healthy dynamic at home and in our communities, and building on that and strategizing and building on that, I think is key. And in those discussions that I've been a part of, finally, as we've said before, some of the systemic stuff is also a part of it. I do not want to stress every single year whether or not I'm going to have housing or not. I don't want to stress whether or not I'm going to be able to pay this ever increasing electricity bill, or how am I going to get water next month, are the water trucks going to come? Because those things also, when you are sitting down with individuals, when you're sitting down with the adults, you realize that these are stressors that very much influence them and increase a likelihood of a high stress environment. So we have to take things in our own hands, as well as using, as Jana said, some of the supports that are already existed through government, state, and community organizations.
Thank you so much to you both. We have to leave it there. That was Jana Harris, child consultant with
Yes.
UNICEF. We appreciate the views so much, and I know UNICEF is doing some really, really good work on some other matters of interest to JFJ, like child diversion. So, Jana, we will be reaching out to you
Yes, most
separately
certainly.
on that particular issue. And Alexis Goff, thank you so much as usual. He's not just a human rights advocate, he's also a psychologist.
Yes,
Right?
yes, please.
So let's give people their dues when we're introducing them. Thank you so much. We take the break.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We just had a very enlightening conversation with Mr. Alexis Goff and Miss Jana Harris on ending corporal punishment, but we do have at least one other thing that we wanted to discuss today.
But before we get into that, Jade, I just wanted to share an email that we got about the topic. This is what one of our supporters said when we shared the flyer. Let's be honest about the whole thing. Giving children more rights will not stop the abuse of our children. What we need is to continue to fight against the culture of violence. Full stop. Taking away God-given parental rights to discipline children in an appropriate way just lead to wayward children and sterile parenting, which makes growing a well-balanced child almost impossible, as we see happening in the so-called liberal developed societies. Let's focus on root causes and not just symptoms. Amen. Now, there are some areas of agreement here that we do need to focus on the root causes, which is some of the systemic issues that Alexis spoke of.
Certainly.
But, I depart with our good colleague here about the God-given parental right to discipline, because I don't think, and by the way, I'm a parent, so I've slapped once or twice before.
You tell it on yourself.
The good thing is that it's not yet banned, right? But there is a difference between slapping once or twice on the fleshy part of the leg versus some of the things that we grew up with
And
the
continue to
hose
happen.
coming
Join-
at your skin,
Yeah.
the broomstick coming at you, and so on. So when people have those types of views, I think you're asking the legislators to somehow put a tier level on what levels of discipline ought to be, done by parents. Yes. And I think we have to move away from seeing the slap once or twice, going all the way up to abuse of our children as somehow this God-given right to discipline. No, I think we have to be looking at other mechanisms, because, and I think Jana said it. Why do you think if you have a disagreement with someone as an adult,
Yes.
is it okay for them to hit you, for you to understand the perspective? I don't understand it.
Yeah, it's a conflation between discipline and violence.
It is.
And it's something that we really need to challenge going forward.
We have to move away from it, and it won't happen overnight, because, as I said, I'm a parent. I'm aware of the realities. And, sometimes as parents, if we're to be honest with ourselves, when we do hit, more often than not is when we're frustrated about something. You can't pay a bill or so on. So we have to get to that stage wherein we're trained as parents how to discipline. That's one. But Alexis said it well. If it is that we don't deal with the systemic issues in society, you're going to be finding that people will just go to those who they believe they have the power over to inflict harm. It's a sad reality, but it is one that we have to be mindful of. So we welcome some of the announcements and mechanisms and recommendations that were just put forward, yeah? But we have to confront it and get with that re-socialization for all of us. And thankfully for some of us as parents, we know better.
Yes.
And, we don't do it. And, but for those who, the alarming videos that we see on social media, remember that one where the mother was in the neck of the child with her foot? I mean, it needs to be completely banned. Child rights must be respected. And it's not just the beating. We need to go into some of the softer child rights issues in Jamaica. I was just laughing to Jay that my mom saw me knocking on my son's door And she was like, you're so Americanized. What kind of right to privacy Pitney have? you know? But that's the context within which we have been socialized, where we
Yes.
don't think children are human beings, where they have opinions, their freedom of expression is so guaranteed.
Yes.
You know, you were a little bit luckier, but up to when I'm an adult, even though I have to tell my mommy knock before you come in my bedroom.
Well, I'm glad my mother has been busy breaking generational curses.
Well, I hope I've broken mine.
Yes.
Yeah, but on to another matter, Jade, quickly. The Joel and Silvera matter was Mr. Silvera had his first court hearing, or appearance rather, last week.
Yes.
And the media and the family members who were reportedly present were barred from the court. Now, I want to put in context for our listeners quickly that Mr. Silvera is a former member of parliament. He is known to reportedly come from a wealthy family in St. Mary. But beyond that, he is well politically connected. Now, because of these variables, especially because of how this matter was first reported in the public, where Mrs. Silvera Melissa said to have died in her sleep peacefully,
Yes.
and then subsequently you heard of murder charges being proffered. It raised questions about cover-up and all of those conversations happening. So rightfully so, this is a public interest matter, because people are going to be looking on, is it one Jamaica for some? Is it another Jamaica for others? Now, we were told that, based on the judge's announcement, that she will be exercising her discretion, and maybe at some point the media and the public would be allowed to hear. I want to go back to what our Constitution provides for. When the Charter was amended in 2011, the right to due process under Section 16, but of specific reference here, subsection 3, provides for an open trial, a public trial for Jamaican citizens. So beyond it being a presumptive one based on common law, it is a constitutionally guaranteed one based on Section 16, subsection 3. Subsection 4 of the Constitution says that in certain circumstances, the judge may decide not to allow the media, not to allow the family, but limit the proceedings to the witnesses, the police, and so on. And based on practice, Jade, we know that family matters, for example, those involving children, more sensitive matters such as rape and so on, have been excluded because you have to protect victims. These are sensitive issues. But in this particular circumstance here, we believe that the principles of an open justice and open court ought to be respected. Now, we subsequently heard from the Court Administration Division that the judge had issued that ruling within the context of the matter being heard within the jurisdiction of the Gun Court Act. I want to quickly point out that the Gun Court Act and how it started was one of the greatest injustices in Jamaican history. In 1974, the Michael Manley government started the Gun Court Act, wherein part of that provision included indefinite detention of Jamaican citizens. Right? And because of that, this particular provision of in-camera hearing, they said at the time, and they were dealing with high crime rate, the influx of gun into the society, and they said to protect the witnesses, let's have Section 13, subsection 1 of the Gun Court Act saying that all of the gun-related matters must be in-camera hearings. But I want to hasten to point out to our listeners, you hear me talking about 1974. The act was amended several times thereafter. But in 2011, the charter came about. So the question arises, what is the utility of that particular provision and whether or not it runs contrary to the constitutional right that we have to an open court? So JFJ is calling for when judges do exercise their discretion, it ought to, one, be reasonable. You have to be looking at what other alternatives may exist. So if it is to protect a witness, how do you deal with that particular issue? If it is not to prejudice the potential jury pool, how do you deal with that particular issue? But we can't have a ban on something like this that is a public interest matter. We think it runs contrary to the principle of justice, and from our perspective, the interest of justice demands transparency. So we are also supporting the Press Association of Jamaica that Section 13, subsection 1, perhaps it ought to be repealed, because in our opinion, again, it runs contrary to the Constitution. And lastly, I want to say to the Jamaicans who are saying that the press and civil society ought not to be criticizing the judges are not above the law. They are a branch of government, and they demand equal criticism from all Jamaican citizens, including the media. So I want to provide some disillusionment for those who say that we ought not to be criticizing. A healthy democracy requires conversation, it requires accountability, and key to that is criticism. And lastly, just to say that we support the DPP, indicating that she's going to be asking the judge to have the matter be publicly heard. So I just wanted to put that in context because this is a really important public interest one, and JFJ's position is very clear. Open justice, open court.
Absolutely. I have nothing to add, and we are out of time. We did not get a trivia winner this week, so we will keep watching our social media for the rest of the day. So if you make it in before midnight tonight, we'll let you know via DM. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jade Williams.
And I'm Michael Jackson. Have a good week.